I regret decluttering this palette more than I regret those drunken college texts. That's pretty serious. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm really excited for today's video. We are going to be talking about all of my makeup eyeshadow palette related regrets. And by that, I have a list of 8 eyeshadow palettes that I have decluttered that I at least semi-regret decluttering. Sorry, I should say 8 palettes. There's at least one face palette I included in today's video, but for the most part, it's just like actual palettes. And then I have a list of 8 eyeshadow palettes that were limited edition that I didn't purchase, that I regret not purchasing because now I can't get it. So I'm actually really excited about this. I had so much fun like putting this list together, and I thought it would just be fun to chat about some of these palette regrets in the comments down below. So certainly if you have any similar regrets, like if you've decluttered, even just like any makeup in general that you regret decluttering, like let's talk about it in the comments, because I just think it would be like a really fun conversation to have. But if you're interested in hearing about the 16 palette related regrets that I'm harboring, stay tuned. First, if you have yet to subscribe to my channel and you like project painting content, if you like chatting about eyeshadow palettes, or if you just like chit-chatting about makeup in general, I would love if you would consider subscribing before moving on. And other than that, let's jump into the video. I know I keep saying this, but having my desk in front of me, I literally feel like a literal newscaster. And it's like today I have like my notes in front of me too, so I just feel like so. I majored in journalism, so this is like part of that too. So I'm just like it's bringing me back to my roots. Anywho, I'm gonna start. Should I go back and forth, or should I just like go? We're just gonna go and we're gonna do 8 and then 8. We're gonna start with the eyeshadow palettes and one face palette that was limited edition that I did not purchase, then I regret not purchasing. We can start with the face palette, and I feel like this might be a little bit controversial because this person is incredibly controversial. But back in her more wholesome days, when Jaclyn Hill released the Champagne Pop collection, and with that she released not the eyeshadow palette, well, she did release an eyeshadow palette. There was controversy around that actually. No, my camera battery is gonna die. Let's get through like a couple hopefully before it dies. So she released the face palette that had the 2 highlighters. I think it was Champagne Pop and Prosecco Pop, and then there were 3 blushes in it. And I like vividly remember being at Sephora, and I believe it was the day that I purchased the Becca Prismatic Amethyst highlighter, and I saw the palette and I was like, I want this really bad, but like I don't feel like I need it. I was definitely like very much in my early stages of getting into makeup, and so I didn't buy it. And like I have gone on to like Mercari and Poshmark and thought about purchasing this a number of times because there's something about that palette that I really wish I would have purchased it. Next up, ooh, this is a good one. So the Pat McGrath, I can't remember, I think it was 2019, could have been 28, maybe 2018. It was the Holiday Opulence collection, and I purchased one of the palettes from it, the like Subversive palette. 3 6-pan palettes released in this collection, and it was the first time I purchased Pat McGrath as well. And I was like really let down by one of the shades in the palette that I purchased. And a little bit later, I can't remember if it was Mandy Lee talking about one of the other palettes in the collection. I'll post pictures. Oh, I forgot, I should scoot over, but then you can like kind of see my dinky light in the back. I will cover my gnome up with the pictures of these palettes. There's 2 other palettes in the collection. To be honest with you, I really wish I had purchased both of them. Oh, who was it? Maybe it was Ashley from, I can't remember who talked about these palettes, but I like went on to see if Sephora still had them or if I could get them half off, because I feel like they were on sale for a little bit. Like I remember the Opulence collection being on sale at one point in time for half off, and I should have purchased one or both of those palettes. And I still think about my regrets about that, even though I don't need a single other eyeshadow palette within my collection. This next one hurts so bad too, and I think it's because like these were more affordable palettes, and I also purchased a palette from this brand instead of at least one of the palettes from this collection. And I'm like, why did I do that and not purchase one of the BH Cosmetics Sweet Shop palettes? I purchased the BH Cosmetics Lunar New Year palette, which I didn't need and have decluttered when I could have purchased 1 or 2 of the Sweet Shop palettes. I'm so upset because I feel like I heard nothing bad about that collection in general. In general, BH Cosmetics has a really good formula that no one seems really to complain about. But what a cute collection. And I didn't purchase it, and I'm so mad at myself for it. Okay, this next palette is an older palette, but like when I look at pictures, for some reason, I really wish I was into makeup when this palette released and purchased it. And it is the ABH, I think it's the, is it the Artist or the Artistry palette? That I think came out in like 2016 maybe. Again, I'll post a picture over on the screen. Do I think about this palette all that frequently? Not really, especially as like ABH has gotten like more controversial. But in the like thick of my ABH obsession, when it was like it didn't matter what type of palette she released, I was gonna buy it. I'm thinking of like ABH Riviera palette release time. Like I literally would have bought anything. I really regretted not owning that palette. Now I'm like, still when I look at it, I'm like, okay, that, like if they were to re-release that color story, I would likely purchase it. Ooh, next up is the Charlotte Tilbury. I feel like this is like a common theme that people really want this, wish they had this quad, and it's the Charlotte Tilbury Fire Rose quad. And in general, I think the Charlotte Tilbury quads are way overpriced, like way overpriced. But it was Britt Clark, I think, that I just saw do the most beautiful look with this Charlotte Tilbury Fire Rose quad. She also talked about how great it was all the time, and by the time I heard her talk about it, I couldn't get it, and I really wish I did. I ended up purchasing 2 other Charlotte Tilbury quads around that time. One of them is the Exaggerized, which I actually really like. Again, don't think it's worth the money, but like it's fine. Do I wish I had gotten the Fire Rose instead? 100%. And then there's another quad by Charlotte Tilbury that I might have been like the Dazzle Eyes or something, and I have decluttered that. So, but the Fire Rose, I still think about. Okay, this next one is Mel Thompson used to talk about this quad all the time from Tom Ford, and I think they reformulated. It was like a really neutral quad. I can't remember the name of it, but I remember her talking about how devastated she was when they either reformulated or like redid the color story, like renamed it. I can't remember the specifics. All I know is Tom Ford quads are way too overpriced. I do have one Tom Ford quad in my collection, but I wish I had purchased a more neutral Tom Ford quad, and I wish I had purchased the Tom Ford quad that Mel always used to talk about. I don't know if I'll be able to figure out what the actual name of the quad was. If you guys know it, leave it in the comments below, because I'm sure there's some of you that like know what I'm talking about. I really wish it was just like the most beautiful rich browns that like would have been the absolute. Okay, my camera battery did indeed die. Hopefully I haven't like moved too much. As I believe I was saying, the Tom Ford quad that Mel Thompson used to always talk about, I just feel like would have been like the perfect, like quick, easy travel palette. Like you think about like a palette that just like your comfort palette, like you use all the time. It goes with you anywhere, it goes traveling with you, and you're always like, it's reliable, old faithful, if you will. I feel like that would have been that palette. But also maybe I don't regret that I don't think I can get this anymore because it's saving me $88. All right, the next palette is the NARS Afterglow eyeshadow palette. I was just looking at a picture of it on my computer. And at the time, this was like an easy skip for me. But since I have introduced myself to the NARS eyeshadow formula, I really regret not owning this, especially also because this gives me vibes of the NARS Summer Solstice palette, which is like one of my favorite warm tone eyeshadow palettes. I love the formula, I love the quality of the shadows, and like looking at this with just like that fun pop of pink too. And now I feel like I'm becoming like a NARS collection, like I feel like I have like this NARS collectionist mentality in my head that like I really wish I could get my hands on that NARS Afterglow eyeshadow palette. And then the 8th and final eyeshadow palette that was limited edition that I didn't purchase, that I regret not purchasing, is the Natasha Denona Metropolis palette. And I do own the alter ego version of it, the Artemis palette, which really should satisfy my need, but I think it's just like a little bit of like that Natasha Denona collector's mentality. Also the packaging on this, like the outer packaging was just so beautiful. And I remember like when this palette released, I was like, I have to have that, I have to purchase it. But then it was $129 and I was like, ugh, I just don't feel like spending that on an eyeshadow palette right now. And then that one stuck around for a while, and like there were so many times where I thought about purchasing it but just talked myself out of it every single time, and I still think about that palette and regret not purchasing it. So those are the 8 eyeshadow palettes that I regret not purchasing. Now let me talk to you about 8 eyeshadow palettes that I regret decluttering in my collection. And we're gonna kick it off with a face palette. I believe this is the only face palette on the list, but it is, speaking of NARS, the NARS Hot Nights face palette. I feel like if I had this nowadays, I would appreciate it so much more than when I did own this and eventually ended up decluttering this. It was a face palette, but you could also use it for eyeshadow. And like, I feel so stupid for decluttering this. Now, I don't reach for face palettes, or used to not reach for face palettes as frequently. I have done better this year at reaching for face palettes, which could also be part of it. But I am just really sad about this because, as I mentioned, I've been getting more into NARS. I really like NARS products, and I just really wish I had this to round out my NARS collection. Okay, next up I have the Too Faced Sweet Peach palette. And I'm like so upset with myself because I feel like at the time I decluttered this, a part of me was just decluttering older palettes in my collection just to declutter, and I feel like that's just so silly. And I like look back at old looks that I used to do with the Sweet Peach palette, and I'm like, gosh, I like really enjoyed, like I had some favorite shades within the NARS Sweet Peach palette, and I just like really kind of miss that palette. I'm gonna say it, I feel like that might be an unpopular opinion because I feel like you either love or hate the Sweet Peach palette. And I remember like during the time, like it was like a phenomenon, the Sweet Peach phenomenon, and so many people wanted that palette, and I don't know why I decluttered it. Now granted, I had it for years before decluttering, but I definitely do regret decluttering that. Okay, this next palette I could purchase again, and I think about purchasing this palette actually quite frequently, the Tartelette in Bloom palette. Now granted, mine was getting older and my quality, just like the quality of the eyeshadow palette, was not what it used to be, but I truly just need to buy the Tartelette in Bloom again, because when I think of like a comfort palette and a go-to palette and a palette that is going to be reliable and not let me down, like I immediately think of the In Bloom palette. I loved the looks that I created with it. I loved every single eyeshadow within the palette, and I just need to own that palette. I need that palette back in my life. You know what I mean? I was preparing for another video that I'm going to do on my channel. It might be up already, it might not. And it's all about makeup that I literally forgot that I owned. I was like going through old YouTube videos trying to like get inspired for content ideas. And as I was like doing that, I was like, oh my gosh, like I forgot I owned this product. And before I knew it, there was quite a few products I've literally forgot I owned. And as I was doing my research, I came across videos of the ColourPop Element of Surprise palette, and I totally forgot about this palette. And I feel like if I owned this in my collection today, I would love this palette so much. It just has like the tones that I like. You have that pop of color. It has like the like blue purple shade, and I don't know why I even decided, like I feel like this is another circumstance where I decluttered the palette because I felt like I had to declutter, but I should have kept that palette. And I really wish that I kept that palette. Next up in that same vein of, I don't know why I decided to declutter this eyeshadow palette, because I used to rave about this eyeshadow palette, and like I'm looking at a picture of it now. I am so actually mad at myself for decluttering this palette, because I would appreciate this palette so much right now, and I liked the palette. I want to say I even loved the palette at the time. It is the Ciate London Pretty Fun and Fearless palette. Like this one hurts my soul a little bit that I decluttered this. I wish I could have this back. I'm like looking at the top rows. It's like the perfect top row of like just neutral browns, and then you have like mauve tone fun. If you like, why did I declutter this? I'm an idiot, and I like really regret that. Like we're talking like deeper regret. Like, you know, when you used to like go out in college and like you'd text people while out drinking, just like be fun and funny, and then like you'd wake up in the morning and you would like go like this and like close your eyes while you deleted those texts because you regretted those texts. Like I regret decluttering this palette more than I regret those drunken college texts. That's pretty serious. Okay, this is another one that I saw on my list of that I forgot I owned, the Tartelette Tease palette. This cute little 6-pan palette had such big pans. The quality of this was like getting not good, and that's why I decided to declutter this, but this was the perfect little pocket palette. Like literally the perfect pocket palette. And I wouldn't say I regret like decluttering this. Can you get this anymore? I should like find out. Tartelette Tees, because I feel like if you can, oh yeah, you still can get this. So I could read, this is like similar to like the Tartelette in Bloom. Like I feel like I had to declutter it, but regret it and like really want to own it again in my collection, because it's truly like the perfect pocket palette for me. Next up, this is like kind of regret, but like I'm okay without it. It's the Huda Electric Obsessions palette. I feel like I decluttered this right before I like started to actually have fun with color, and I want this mostly just for like the fun electric pops in my collection. I also love my Huda Obsessions palettes. Granted, there's some that are hit or miss, but I actually felt like the quality of this palette was really good. This was, fun fact, the first Huda Obsessions palette I ever purchased. My first experience with her eyeshadow formula, and I have since gone on to purchase so many Huda eyeshadow palettes, so I do kind of regret decluttering that. And then to wrap it up, I have 2 Kat Von D eyeshadow palettes to talk about. One of them being the Serpentina eyeshadow palette, and the second being the Metal Matte eyeshadow palette. And I kind of regret decluttering these. Like these aren't as like painful as like the Ciate palette, but I feel like I would have a greater appreciation for these palettes if they were in my collection nowadays. Both of these had more color than I was used to working with when I owned these in my collection, and I feel like for that reason these palettes really intimidated me, and so I decluttered them thinking they didn't really serve a purpose in my collection. But now that I have just had more fun with eyeshadow, experimenting with color, still almost every day this year I've had neutral eyeshadow, but I do still like to play with color from time to time. I feel like I would have a greater appreciation for these palettes, so there is a small part of me that kind of regrets decluttering those 2 from Kat Von D. But after that, that is going to wrap it up for today's palette regret video. I would love to know your thoughts again in the comments below. Thank you so much for sticking around to watch today's video and for supporting my channel as you guys always do. I love you guys so much, and I'll catch you in my next video. Bye.